The Jocko parrot represents what happens in species recovery. This is a bird that came very close to the edge after Hurricane David, and thanks to the protected area policies of Dominica and the forest protection specifically, this species was able to rebound over a 30-year period. The Cicero parrot also did. The interesting difference between the two parrot species is that the Jocko is much more omnivorous, is a much more generalist forager, and has been an opportunistic fruit eater. So it has capitalized on the proliferation of citrus farming in Dominica, and some other crops as well, but particularly citrus. This is one of the reasons why our organization, in collaboration with the ministry and with forestry, developed a model juice processing facility in the village of Dublin. And the idea was to empower the farmers in the Syndicate Estate area to be able to manage their crops differently. Rather than storing fruits on trees for the fresh fruit market, they could process fruits and they could regulate how the harvest was to occur. And what this really means is increasing utilization and removing that crop set from exploitation by wildlife. And I have to interject that it's not just parrots. Parrots get a bum rap here because yes, they do eat some citrus, but a lot of small birds, bananaquits, other creatures also take advantage of citrus. The question isn't people versus parrots. That's not the way to approach this sort of an issue. The question is, how do we adapt strategies for agriculture that are consistent with our protection policies for wildlife, our long-term natural resource use and sustainability, ethical considerations, and also legal considerations. These are specially protected birds, and therefore, nationally, there is no harm to come to them or their young or their nests. By having processing as an option for farmers, you basically are giving the technology and the wherewithal for farmers to take that agricultural practice in a new direction. It's very progressive, it's very, very sensible, it's cost effective, it creates new markets and new opportunities. Dominica still imports an awful lot of fruit juice, and you have a tremendous potential here to be able to harvest fruits and process fruits, not only for the immediate, but for the long term, and that is also a policy, a practice that's consistent with your wildlife conservation. The key is to make the juicing processing facility in Dublin workable, to make it a model, and then to replicate it for communities around the island so that you could have locally based, community-based enterprise that's ecologically responsible, agriculturally responsible, and ultimately very lucrative for the farmers that are working together. Your Cicero parrot is dependent on old growth forest. It's a high elevation species. It's a very shy bird, and it is not the bird that plagues citrus. We see very, very few. I've never personally, in 16 years, ever seen a Cicero parrot on an orange tree or a grapefruit tree. If they visit, it's very infrequently, and they compete with the Jocko parrot. The Jocko parrot is more social, it's more aggressive, and it's much bolder. So these birds that are exploiting agricultural crops are Jocko parrots, but they are not the only culprits. There is a diversity of wildlife that is capitalizing on fruit being stored on trees. And whenever you store any crop where it grows long enough, something is going to eat it, or it's going to fall and spoil. And I think the point of this whole enterprise with processing was to illuminate the relatively low utilization frequency of fruit. We can up the utilization by processing. We can use more of the fruit. We're also removing the fruit from the tree as a resource for wildlife so that they go somewhere else. They go back to the forest and forage there. It's a practical solution. It's a responsible solution. It doesn't damage anything. And the end point of this discussion is that when wildlife recovers, it recovers to its carrying capacity. It recovers to the capacity that its environment and its food and spatial resources will allow. We have no management policy for hummingbirds, and they occupy a level in the ecosystem, but we don't see ourselves besieged with hummingbirds. We don't have to fight our way to the door of our house because there's so many hummingbirds in our way. Nature seeks a balance, and its carrying capacity is dependent on the food and spatial resources of that species. That is true for parrots as well. What we're seeing in terms of conflict with humans is not unique here. There are wildlife conflicts with agriculture all around the world with all types of wildlife, from elephants down to rodents. And it's important to integrate best management practices for your agriculture that is also protective of your wildlife. And that's what can happen here. That's what the juicing option provides. The Parrot program is symbolic of the conservation initiatives that are not only island-wide but global. We are living in a time where we can actually see the end of nature, and that's a very frightening prospect. What the Parrot program has taught us over 30 plus years is that a very protective policy for Dominica's interior, for its forest, for its wildlife overall, enables even very, very sensitive and threatened wildlife species like the Cicero parrot to rebound from near extinction in 1979. That's a very, very profound lesson, because what it tells us is that if we give nature a chance, if we protect the space, if we protect the integrity of the forest, nature has tremendous resilience. And we see that every day on Dominica because you're blessed with this wealth of forest, clean rivers, clean air. The future is very, very important because we can never say we're done, we've done a good job, we can all go home and just pat ourselves on the back. Conservation and natural resource management is an ongoing affair. It is never over. The vigilance never ends. There are always new threats. There are always new proposals that come from the far-flung corners of the world to exploit natural resources. And this country, as a model country, as a very, very special place, has to be not only mindful of what those threats are, but very, very protective and very proud and very suspicious of any threat that might approach this ecosystem. On top of that, the parrots continue to be flagships. They continue to be ambassadors for the success story on Dominica. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful example of what can happen where we take just a couple iconic species and they become this tremendous leverage for a whole movement, for a whole attitude and ethic about wildlife and about wild places. That's a wonderful, wonderful outcome. But it doesn't end there. It comes down to each individual working in their communities with their family to make sure that everyone that they know understands the principles of conservation and of protection, and that they work together and collectively to make sure that bad things don't happen, and if bad things do, that the authorities are approached and that appropriate action is taken. We have to police one another just as we have to look out for the world we live in. It's not somebody else's job. It's not for just forestry to do. It's all of us together. And it's that teamwork that really makes things happen. And it's also, I might add, the same approach that's made this country such a success. Each and every person celebrates the natural diversity of this island. You've got a great platform to continue, and I think the rest of the world is going to be right there with you saying, that's the way you should do it.